This Choircast podcast is brought to you by my book, Unless a Seed Falls to the Ground, Welcoming the Death of the Whiteness Gospel. I wrote this story as a plea for white Christian America to enter into a season of hospice spirituality to recover from the cancerous lie that we can start over, be in charge, and recover some original purity of Christianity. One friend calls it a love story to the church, the United States, and the entire human family. It's available now on Amazon.
Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? Damn. You've made it to another Smarty Pants episode of the Unbelief Podcast. Today, I am interviewing Nathan Webb. I actually get to do this interview in person, which is such a treat.
Unheard of.
Right. And Nathan is an expert in this really interesting area, which is the intersection of nerd, geek, gamer culture and spirituality. He actually has a community of people that are all about that. And what's that called?
It's called Checkpoint Church.
Yep. And it's like, church, you guys do all kind of normal church stuff, right?
We are unapologetically a church plant.
Very
not just
cool.
doing the community thing, but actually like wanting to be known as church in our title.
Right. So, okay, clearly you can't be a religious leader to nerds, geeks, and gamers without being a nerd, geek, and or gamer
Amen.
yourself. Do you classify yourself as all three?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of what got this started was that I was looking for a place that fit me as a person. You know, I was a pastor. I felt called to ministry, but did I really feel like the church that I had traditionally been a part of? I'm a PK. I've been in the church my entire life.
And for people who are not familiar with the lingo, PK is
Sure.
preacher's kids. Your parent was a preacher.
Right. My dad was a pastor, was a second career. And so this was whenever I was, a toddler, he made the move to ministry. And so my siblings that are older than me had a life pre my dad being a minister, but I didn't. It was all I ever knew. It's what I grew up in.
Interesting.
I wasn't the rebellious pastor's kid, the kind of like stereotypical one that goes off. No, I loved youth group.
Yeah.
I was big in the church and like that was very much a part of my life, but I felt like I wasn't really allowed
Okay.
to be my nerdy self.
Sure.
And so I had my like youth group self that was like playing horse and like shooting hoops and the sporty side. And then I went to school and I was like reading manga and collecting Shonen Jump with my friends and like talking about whatever latest Pokemon game or syncing up our Nintendo DSs. Like the two worlds weren't allowed to meet. And so that was what kind of made Checkpoint happen was, well, maybe there are people that aren't being reached just like I wasn't being reached.
Okay.
And if me, who had every opportunity in the world to have a healthy spiritual life, still couldn't make that part of myself fit in church, that there were probably others that had a similar experience.
Okay. So I'm trying to do some like definition. So I might pause you when you use lingo to get you to tell us, what does that mean?
Right.
Because I know that there are some nerds, geeks, and gamers listening to this podcast, but not everybody is. But actually, I feel like it's important for us to just start out with like those three terms. What do they mean? How are they, where do they overlap? How are they distinct?
So gamers is the easy one,
Right.
people that play games.
But my experience is right now, if you just say people who play games, like my mom plays games. She's not a gamer. She's on her phone playing, solitaire. And my experience is people who identify as gamers, there's some specific requirements.
That's fair. I think there are levels of ownership that people are willing to claim. But I think that there's also my fear of the like no true Scotsman fallacy coming up of like, some people will tell me, I'm not a gamer. I'm not a nerd. I can't be a part of this community. And I push back and be like, well, yeah, you are.
Right.
You might not identify that way, and that's okay. And you don't have to like try to shoehorn yourself in. But I think that the more that I overthink these definitions, the more that it feels like an exclusive club instead of something that's being intentionally inclusive to a very specific person. So for me, it's like, you know, if you're a gamer or not, probably. Right. But I think that we should also be generous with ourselves and allow ourselves to consider if we might be that thing or not, without just saying, oh, no, I'm definitely not, because I don't watch every Game Award show that happens, or because I don't collect every single console, I'm not a gamer. No, phone gamers can be gamers.
I think, though, like, just even knowing that Game Award shows exist. Right. So that's like a threshold. Like, I feel like it's all a continuum, but at some point people cross this line where they say, I'm a gamer. Yeah. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong. I think that they can be playing a PlayStation, or they can be, you know, on a keyboard and mouse. But it's people who are playing, I would say, bigger games, like bigger titles that are more like they have a Steam account, or they know what Steam is. What are some things that, like, when you're talking to the gamers, like, what are they thinking? Like, what do they do that they identify like that? We have a not new, it's not truly new, but it's definitely like been more accepted recently than ever before, of where I think that gaming has shed a lot of the toxic masculinity. Yeah. We've lost a lot of the aspect of like, you have to be a gamer. Like, I'm trying to remember, like, I mean, consider the fact that the Game Boy is called the Game Boy. Right. We had this mentality of there were games and then there were games for girls. You know what I mean? Yeah, no, and we've changed. We've moved past that into an era of what is commonly known as like cozy games. And so there are people that are playing games on their phone that are playing Candy Crush, or are playing Stardew Valley, or are playing Farmville, or whatever. And that is just as much an aspect of gaming, to the point that it's become a majority of gamers. Oh yeah. Like casual gamers are like, we're 50% phone gamers. And I'm pulling that number out of nowhere. I don't know where it is now, but I know that years ago it was 50% people were playing on their phones. It may be more than that now. And so I think that, for me, it comes down to, you know it if you are. It probably comes down to a gamer is somebody that not only games, but like that's an identifier for them. Like, I think about the concept of Adam Grant talks about, like, if you exercise for 5 minutes every day, you should consider yourself someone who exercises. Okay. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, if you are somebody that gets up and puts your tennis shoes on with the intention of going to the gym, and you drive to the gym and you sit in the parking lot and you say, I'm somebody that goes to the gym, that's a step towards that. Right. And so it's identity markers are whatever we want them to be, but it does depend on, like, do you want that aspect of yourself? And if you do, then I think you should own it. Cool. So that's gamers. That's gamers. Nerds and geeks. Nerds and geeks. The only differentiating factor for me between those two, nerds love, geeks know. So nerds are passionate about things. Nerds are passionate about nerds are passionate about Star Trek. They are passionate about video games. They are passionate about manga. They are passionate about quilting. They are passionate about tech. They are passionate about crafting. Fill in the blank. They are people who are passionate about something. And so that's my quantifier, is like, I could not make an anime as long as I tried. I'm not artistic enough to have the know-how, the skill set to do that, but I love them more than anyone. I'm going to be able to have a impassioned conversation around these things in a way that quantifies me as I am a nerd about these things. Got it. Geeks. So I am a nerd about Star Trek. I want to live in that world. There you go. I'm also a nerd about ancient Near Eastern culture and ancient spiritual texts, particularly the Bible. But I'm an equal opportunity nerd when it comes to spiritual texts that are old. And I think then that would mean that I am very much an Apple nerd. I've never used those two terms together. I normally say Apple fanboy or Apple evangelist. Yeah. Fair. But but Apple nerd for sure. Because that's nerds. What's geek? You said nerds are passionate, geeks no.
Geeks know. So
Okay.
geeks are people that are informed about things. So they know factoids. They are able to drop information. They are somebody that if you say, I'm building a PC, they say, well, come let me help you build it because I know how to build it.
Yeah,
I
here's
know
the
how
card
do
you need
these
to buy.
things. Here's this, that, and the other. I know the best stuff. I know the best ways. So like for me, I'm an anime nerd. I'm a YouTube geek. Like I can talk YouTube shop.
Yeah.
I can talk SEO and search engine optimization stuff. Like I can talk about these things because I am knowledgeable about them.
Right.
And so for me, that's the differentiating factor. But I think that that's incredibly subjective.
Right. No,
Those are just my definitions. Somebody might do the opposite. Like I hear a lot of people talk about the term of like geeking out. Somebody could say that's just a passionate conversation about things.
Yeah.
For me, if I use the phrase geeking out, I'm talking about you're talking deets. You're talking the specifics and the language of this thing versus just an impassioned person.
Yeah. So I'd say then I'm a nerd about those things. I'm also a geek about the ancient Near Eastern culture, but also about audio production, video production, and TikTok. I just can talk, will hopefully, who knows, by the time this podcast comes out, it's possible that doesn't exist anymore, RIP. But, and I've appreciated you and I just spent some time talking about YouTube and getting your geekiness from that. Just super helpful. Okay. So we've defined nerd, geeks, gamers. When did it start for you that you really sort of identified yourself? You figured like, this is part of my identity. This is who I am. Like, when did that happen for you? Can you kind of rewind your clock and be like, oh yeah. I remember. So for me, I knew I was a nerd. Like I owned it as part of who I was. When I was in middle school, I walked in the 6th grade, was not popular, and middle school is just soul crushing, fear, all the things. I go into the lunchroom, nobody looking at me, and then I sit down at a table next to random people, and it turns out they were all Star Trek nerds, as I was. And we talked about Star Trek from the moment we sat down until the moment we had to leave to go to our next class. And it was somewhere in that year that I realized, oh, no. Yeah, I'm a nerd. And I was okay with it, right? What about you?
I think there's a lot of moments where I've kind of like been re-evangelized. I have been like reminded of my nerddom and of my things that I love. For me, I mean, my dad says that my first word was actually like that I was a corrector. I was a knower. I was a nerd about things who wanted to talk about things and that kind of stuff. And so maybe like it's always been a part of me. My origin story for a lot of my fandom in anime and in manga was we have a grocery store here in North Carolina called the Food Lion. And at Food Lion, they have a magazine aisle where there'll be like the People magazine and whatever magazines are out. And there was one time where we were walking, I would go to that aisle because what else did I have to do whenever I was like 6? And so I would go and just stare at the magazines. And there was one magazine that had this character from the anime Yu-Gi-Oh, which is also a manga. And I was like watching the show at the time and saw that this character was on the front of a magazine. And I was like, what's that about? And it was also put the wrong way with the words being, backwards and the opening of the book being on the left. And so I was like, what's that? Come to find out, it's this magazine called Shonen Jump that would be delivered every single month that would come with like a chapter out of 8 different manga. Is serialized. And it was at the Food Lion. And so I picked it up. And I told my parents, I was like, can I have this? They said, sure. And so I started to read them, and I would go back to the Food Lion every month and be like, can we have this edition, this edition? And then they were like, well, why don't we just subscribe to this magazine so we stop going to the Food Lion every single month? And then it started showing up at my door, and I just couldn't wait for the next one. And I would read and consume and read them over and over and over. And I still have that collection. And like, I loved that part of just getting immersed in pop culture and in reading.
Yeah.
And from there, it just kept going down the rabbit hill of like, we're going to learn more about anime, and I'm going to stay up past my bedtime and turn on Adult Swim and watch the shows that I'm not supposed to watch. But instead of like Family Guy or South Park, I'm watching Full Metal Alchemist and these anime that are going to change my life forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I loved stories, and the stories that were being told that I was interested in weren't the ones that were like customary for an 8-year-old. It was these deep, dark Japanese stories that I wanted to know about. And that was the origin. And then video games. I mean, I've always loved video games.
Right. What was your first video game that you got obsessed with? Do you remember that?
Pokemon Blue.
Pokemon
Probably
Blue
would have been my first one.
Yeah.
I had the classic Game Boy, and I think I inherited it from my older brother.
Yeah.
And just obsessed with Pokemon. I still have the memories of like, they didn't have backlights at that time. And so the game systems were dark. You could hardly see them, especially if you didn't have a light to see them with. And so I have memories of playing Pokemon on like drives home from dinner with the like traffic lights and like trying to see the reflection of the light in the screen. So I get to play like 3 screens of Pokemon with the light that was on. And those are just fond memories of growing up with that console.
Yeah. I'm old. So the first game that I was really obsessed with trying to get good at was pole position on my Atari 7600. And I got calluses on my hand from the joystick. But the first game that I didn't go to sleep because I was playing it was a game called Super Contra. And holy cow, and like, that was the game where the Konami code was invented.
Sure.
And so, man, I got so good at up, down, down, left, right. I mean, like it was amazing. Okay. So that's your sort of origin story, but what about the spirituality side? Like, cause I know so many nerds, geeks, gamers. I have all these friends that do like Dungeons and Dragons or manga or like really nerd out on like all this different stuff. But when did you start pairing those things together?
That's the tough question. I feel like I was doing it all along. I think there's that connection with storytelling that like a lot of my peers in ministry, and especially in like more progressive forms of ministry, talk about this like robust and powerful deconstruction experience where they finally like had this addressing with like their evangelical youth. And they had like this big moment where they realized like they didn't believe this the way they once did. And for me, like I was 8 watching Full Metal Alchemist, and they would like talk about science and religion and atheism. And we have this powerful character who doesn't believe in God. And I was 8 years old experiencing this character who's like an aspect of his personality was agnosticism. But the whole show is about this.
Right.
And so like, as you get further, you start to experience the unknown, and one of the main characters in the show being the representation of God and of nothingness. And it's just this void of a person in this white space. So like weird stuff has been the stories that I've been obsessed with forever.
Yeah.
And I've never really stopped taking in that kind of content. I've never stopped wrestling with that media. It's always been a part of the stories that I consume. And then you go on the other end of the spectrum, and one of the very first like games that I defined as being meaningful for me spiritually was Final Fantasy X.
Okay. Yeah, I've played that game.
So Final Fantasy X, the big bad is sin. Like, are you kidding? How do you get more on the nose than the big bad being sin? And then, spoiler alert for Final Fantasy X, being sin as a part of your literal family, part of your heritage. You're fighting generational trauma. Like it's always been the story that I've been wrestling with. And so what it came down to for me was just acknowledging this has always been the story. This has always been what I've been wrestling with. I've always tied these things together in my mind as being the divine is in media.
Yeah.
And the God is coming through the stories that we tell, whether we like it or not. It's just a part of the stories that we tell.
Yeah. Which is interesting to me because I grew up in a much more evangelical culture during the 90s. And at that moment in time, and I know it's still the case it shifted a bit though. At that moment, it was Christian alternatives to everything.
Sure.
Christian alternatives to comic books, Christian alternatives to romance novels, Christian alternatives to music. I remember having a chart that was like a poster, and it would have the non-Christian, the secular artist like Nirvana, and then it would tell you the Christian equivalent, which was Grammatrain, right? Also, Grammatrain's amazing, but and so it's interesting because like when I hear you talk about that, like you sort of always integrating those two. For me, I didn't have that because I was taught by this evangelical culture that like, oh, if it's not overtly and intentionally Christian, then your spirituality didn't connect with it, and it's probably leading you down the path to hell, and you will burn forever in eternity as a result. And so it's interesting to hear this like sort of lifetime of integration, because for me, it was later when I started, there was some teenage rebellion at some point to it that like, I started being like, no, you can find God in all of these places, right? So as you're like, you talked about Final Fantasy, what are one or two, like for the people who are listening, that are sort of their curiosity is piqued by this spirituality and then nerd geeks and gamers. What's a story or two that is that you feel like has particular spiritual power that you know that you say, oh yeah, no, that's it, that's the thing, and like I love it if you just sort of tell us the story for a second.
Yeah. I could riff on this for hours.
Great.
So, I mean,
I promise we're not doing this for hours.
As of this recording, I mean, we have 150 of these. So we do nerdy sermons at Checkpoint, and that is exactly this conversation.
Okay.
We talk about media. We draw out some kind of Christian truth or Jesus truth or spiritual truth or Buddhist truth. I mean, we're able to draw out some kind of form of like spiritual reality from media every single week. And so we've done this for years at this point. But two that I can mention off the top of my head that are incredibly important. One that's incredibly important to me, and then one that's incredibly important to Checkpoint in our story and Christian culture. So the one that's most important to me is a game called Undertale. Undertale is an indie game made by this guy named Toby Fox. It doesn't look like much. It looks like an old school, like Super Nintendo-esque game. It was made as kind of a clone inspired by a game called Earthbound, which is a very popular gaming series from the Super Nintendo days. But the premise of the game is that you are a human who has fallen into this underworld. You're in the Undertale. You've fallen down. And in this world, you are exploring like any other role-playing game might. You enter into this first world and you don't know where you are. You don't know what to do. You're approached by monsters. You're approached by these weird creatures, and you have to figure out what to do.
Right.
And so you queue up your first screen, and it puts you inside this little box, and it puts you through what we call in the gaming industry bullet hells. So there are just a bunch of things coming at you, and you're dodging.
Okay.
And in the meantime, you have choices of what you want to do. Do you want to fight this thing? Do you want to run away from this thing? Do you want to use an item? What have you? And it gives you this choice that is in the trailer for the game. Nothing has to die in this game.
Oh, wow.
That's the premise. The first game, first RPG where nothing has to die.
RPG is a role-playing
game. Right. And so you have the choice then, do you want to follow that rule of the game and kill nothing? Or do you want to play like every other game and kill the things that attack you because they attacked you first?
Wow.
And so that premise...
That's an intense...
unpacked my comprehension of gaming. right? Like every game ever has been the same thing. You take down the big bad, you take down the monsters, you fight the things in front of you. This game says, no, you don't actually have to do that.
Wow.
You can make friends with the monsters because they're just other people. They're just other things.
Oh my gosh.
And so you get to have conversations with these other creatures that are like, some of them, the very first character you meet is this incredibly loving maternal character named Toriel, as in Toriel. She teaches you how to navigate the underground. She teaches you how to solve puzzles. She holds your hand literally through some puzzles because she's too worried for you that you might get impaled by some spikes. And so she's concerned. She asks what kind of pie you want whenever she's going to make. Do you want a cinnamon pie or do you want this? And so she's just this loving maternal character, but she wants to protect you. Yeah. She doesn't want to let you out into the world. Yeah. And so there's this door that leads to the rest of the world. She says, no, you can't cross this boundary. If you do, I won't take care of you. She confronts you. You have to fight her. What are you going to do? Are you going to hurt mom? Are you going to attack mom? Are you going to kill mom? You have the choice, or you don't have to. And it's this rich story. I don't want to spoil anything too much beyond the rest of that experience, but that concept in and of itself takes it and it runs with it.
How do you not kill mom or not kill something in that game?
So you have a choice. Mom can get tired out.
Okay.
Mom will not kill you. Mom will get you down to one hit point left. And then it doesn't matter if you try to run into her attacks, they'll dodge you. So no matter what, mom won't kill you.
I love
because she doesn't want you to die.
Of course.
She just wants to keep you there. So you can tire out mom, eventually tucker her out. She gets done and you get to the point where she says, fine, you go, but don't come back. I never want to see you again. You walk through the door. She locks the door behind you.
Oh, wow.
Or you can kill mom. You can kill her. You can stab her and she dies. And you see the red gash across her and you know that you've done a bad thing.
Yeah.
You've made a tough choice to kill mom. So that's all I'll spoil about that part. That's the tutorial. That's the tutorial section. That's not too much of a spoiler. The rest of the game continues to go down those themes. There are people in this world that hate you because of the fact that you are a human, because they're terrified of you, because humans have fallen here before.
Right.
There are also characters in this world that are going to be goofy and funny. There are characters that are going to not fear you one bit because they know for a fact they can kill you because they're way stronger than you are. There's all these sorts of things. But then there's this other side of the game. So this game has 3 endings, which I won't spoil much about how they actually come to be.
Right.
There's ending number 1, which is the neutral ending.
Okay.
Maybe you've killed a thing or two on accident.
Right.
Maybe you made a bad choice. Only so many things can happen from that one.
Okay.
Then you have the true ending. That is if you truly have done a pure pacifist run. You haven't killed a single thing. But there's a third ending. And the third ending, trigger warning, I suppose, is called the genocide route. In the genocide route, you literally have to kill everything.
Wow.
And whenever I say everything, I don't mean all the main characters.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to continue killing every single random enemy until no more show up.
Wow.
It's brutal. It's heart-wrenching. It's just so good. It's so good. And so these are the games that like form me as a person, consistently asking like, how far will I go? What are my morals? What are the ethics that come with me in video games that I play?
Yeah, I love that. And so clearly there's a lot of spiritual themes, but you're the expert. Give us one or two. Obviously, like you were just telling the story of the game, and I'm just over here loving every second of this, but be explicit. What's one or two of the themes that you're like, oh yeah, this is spiritual?
So being a Methodist, we try to weave into our
Methodist is a denomination of Christianity.
Correct. And so we adhere to a lot of the insights and teachings of the father of Methodism, John Wesley. And one of his rules was the 3 general rules: to do good, to do no harm, to attend upon the ordinances of God, which is a mouthful. So we have adopted them as rules in our community, as to do good, do no harm, and strive to grow in some way.
Yeah, that's good.
And so this is a direct example of doing no harm.
Yeah.
What does it mean to do no harm? And not only what does it mean to not harm, but to intentionally choose to not harm.
And I love one of the things that you said about that, because when you were describing taking that path, you said you can choose to befriend the monsters. Mm-hmm. And I think when when you combine do no harm with that, like lights go off in my brain of like the only way, maybe not the only way, but let's just go with the superlative. The only way that you can ultimately exist in this world and do no harm is you have to humanize all the villains, right? Everybody is a person, and if you can get there, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this game will do it.
Yeah.
And so again, without trying to spoil anything, there's going to be a character that is as close to irredeemable as you can get. Mm-hmm. But the game is still going to ask you to redeem them.
Wow.
And if you don't, then you're not going to get the true pacifist ending.
Wow.
If you really want to get to the pacifist route, you've got to be a pacifist. Yeah. And so it's going to make you make tough choices in a fantasy world.
For sure.
And that's the best part of video games to me.
Yeah.
Is that all of this is fantasy. Mm-hmm. All of this is myth.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of like Tolkien Lewis idea of like, this is the importance of myth. The importance of myth is that we get to make choices that don't necessarily impact other people, but deeply impact us.
Yeah.
Deeply impact our soul, which is a major premise of Undertale as well. The soul.
Man, Nathan,
that's one.
Thank you for spending this time, because I love all of this. And so I'm going to ask you for, I tell
the second one in 30 seconds?
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
So the second piece of media, this is our video that popped off. It is a animated series called Has Been Hotel.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon. You can watch it right now. The premise of the show is that we follow the main character, who is the daughter of Lucifer.
Okay.
Who wants to run a hotel in hell that redeems the denizens of hell.
Ah, cool.
That is the premise of the show.
Oh, I love that.
It made people so uncomfortable. It talks about Lilith. It talks about the Jewish origin story of Genesis. It talks about all sorts of things, original sin, that make people so uncomfortable. It portrays Adam as this absolute bigoted like monster.
Right.
It does some hilarious things. It pushes some boundaries. It says all the words you can imagine. But that premise alone, the daughter of Lucifer wants to redeem hell. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Like, what a statement.
What's the name of that show again?
Has Been Hotel.
Has Been Hotel. Okay, so that's one. If you had to recommend, so somebody here not really been exposed to any of the nerd geek gamer culture, manga, that kind of stuff. If somebody's going to dip their toe in for the first time, what are 2 or 3 titles? Obviously, Has Been Hotel is great, but 2 or 3 titles that are interesting for for first timers, and the spirituality is kind of at the surface. It's easy to connect that.
That's a really tough question. Let me look up something really quickly. We can cut this out, obviously, but let's see if I can find some highly relatable. The issue with this question and the issue with this in general is that a lot of it is just so weird.
Yeah, no.
So much is so weird of the stuff that I talk about and the things that I explore. And so it's like, it's hard to recommend. So
like a beginner manga or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think is easy enough to recommend is it's a documentary. So for those that really want to tie this to real life, a documentary called The Remarkable Life of Ibelin. It's on Netflix. It's an hour and a half of your time, and it covers the life of a disabled man who finds community through World of Warcraft.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So that's an easy one, approachable one. Anybody can watch a documentary.
World of Warcraft is a video game.
It is. It's a MMORPG, a massive multiplayer online role-playing game.
So that means that like a bajillion people are all in this single world, but they're real. A lot of them are real people like you. and you can interact with them, you can fight them. There's also computer generated characters as well. But so massively multiplayer means like all these people are in the same world, and it's a role playing game like Final Fantasy or that kind of thing. So this is this guy. That's really interesting. What about a book? What's a physical media or ebook, like that kind of thing that you say, oh, this one's really good. It could just be your favorite, but
what's the best? Like, I mean, Full Metal Alchemist, you can't go wrong with that. It's just one of the best manga of all time. It's one of the best manga ever written. It's a story of these alchemist brothers that are trying to seek out the Philosopher's Stone so they can bring back their mother who passed away when they were young.
Okay.
But it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
It's military power. It's talking about is the military ever justifiable in this kind of like military run state? The main bad guys are based off of the 7 deadly sins. So there's going to be like spiritual themes interwoven throughout it, but at the same time, it's going to be something that's really rich. So that's one that I'd recommend. I also think a really good anime, that's a good approachable starter anime, especially if you like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, then you're going to be open to fantasy, is called Frieren, Beyond Journey's End.
How do you spell that?
Right. It is, like a Gaelic name. Frieren.
Okay.
And the premise of that show is the heroes have succeeded. They've solved the thing. They've saved the village. Everybody's safe.
Yeah.
Elves live a really long time.
Okay.
And so the elf that was in the original heroes party is still living. All the other heroes have died, but she's still alive. And so what does she do? What does she do after the journey's done? What does she continue to live in her life? And how does she continue to process downright immortality?
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating concept there, and a good one to follow, and an easy anime to watch. I think that one's not going to freak anybody out with too many of the weird, anime themes that come up in some of the others.
Yeah. And while those are not my thing, I also, now that you're talking about that, I have a novel recommendation for a novel that I think, especially if you're older, you grew up playing these older video games, and you like dystopian future novels. There's a novel called Ready Player One.
Sure.
That like changed everything for me. I love that book, and it's a fun book either way. Also, I'm also one of the people that gets really angry about the movie that came out that is not like the book and all and ruins everything. But it's fine. It's fine. This is my passion. This is my nerdiness. I'm doing it. So anyway, that's there. Thank you so much for the recommendations. And if they are looking for you and your community, they've got a nephew that they say,
that's what I hear all the time.
This is for them. Where do they find you?
So if you've got somebody that is in the gaming space, they probably know where to find us. You can go to our Discord, Checkpoint Church, discord.gg/Checkpoint Church, or you can find us on Twitch or on YouTube, anywhere where we're on. Those are our big 3 platforms. And so they should be able to find us.
And it's called Checkpoint Church.
Checkpoint Church, like a checkpoint in a video game.
That's so great. All right. Thank you so much. And of course, we have our own community. It's called Not Church. It's called that because it's all the things you wish you could have in a church, a place to explore spiritual beliefs, and a place where people are actually there for each other without somebody telling you you're going to hell because you use tarot cards or whatever it is. If you're interested in that, you should go to patreon.com/skepticpastor. Costs $3 because we're not going to ask you to give you a percentage of your income. It's pay for what you get. If it stops working, you stop paying. And we also have merch at noomacommunity.com/store, NOOMA community.com/store. And wherever you listen to this podcast, if you could give us a review, all the stars, and actually maybe even some text in there, that would be super helpful. It really helps us spread the word. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.